And my interest has been in there, my interest has been in the economics, and especially, I've discovered over the years that we were victims of a hoax, actually. When the gas industry came here in 2008, 2009, they had hired a couple professors at Penn State to produce a advocacy paper for them, which they released as independent research. And it was used in the legislature in Harrisburg to fight off the desire for a severance tax. So they paid the professors about $100,000. It was one of the great bargains, I think, because they were able to avoid millions of dollars in taxes. This hoax that they pulled was not unusual. It was how they do business across the country. In every shale play, and every time the petroleum industry comes into an area, and they're a nomadic industry. So when they come into an area, they need to immediately gain favor with the people who are in charge. So they come in and they produce these papers, usually through colleges, sometimes through respected agencies, and they completely overwhelm the reality with their claims. For instance, the Penn State reports came out in 2009, 2010, 2011, and they were used in the legislature to beat back Governor Rendell's proposed severance tax. And he also created a gold rush mentality around gas drilling. The 2011, the last one, Penn State report predicted by 2020 that the fracking industry would create 256,420 jobs in Pennsylvania. Currently, there are about 10 to 15,000 industry jobs in Pennsylvania. But that number and the number of jobs and their job numbers, the numbers that they said they were going to pay in taxes, the numbers that they said was going to be created in economic development in the state would, in the words of two governors, Rendell and Corbett, be a game changer. It would be a game changer. It was the goose that laid the golden egg. It was a generational opportunity for the state. But in fact, they never created the jobs. They pay very little in the way of taxes because you're not allowed to tax them locally, so they don't pay on any of the infrastructure they bring in here like other industry would. They have, in fact, left very little positive behind them. They're in competition. They're in competition with our tourist industry, because they're coming in and they're essentially breaking up our forest and our forest lands and making them unattractive to tourists. The tourist and travel industry in Pennsylvania dwarfs the gas industry. They have about 300,000 jobs. That's in the travel side of industry. Totally, the leisure industry has almost 600,000 jobs. Half of them are in travel, the travel part and the tourist part. We're in a very good position in this part of Pennsylvania because we have this wonderful wildlands that Lycoming County is part of, the Pennsylvania Wilds. There are over 2 million acres of woodlands, the size of Yellowstone Park, actually, and there are 26 state parks. So we have an infrastructure. We have a wonderful wilderness area, and we're within about a 3 to 4 hour drive of tens of millions of people who live on the East Coast, and from south of Philadelphia through north of New York City, and also down as far as Washington, D.C. So we have a possibility for people, and they're coming. There is a good industry here now. They come for a few days to get away. It only takes them a few hours to get here. They spend 3-4 days on average. They leave some money behind, and they don't create any very little disturbance, environmental disturbance. Recreational use of the forest is incompatible with the gas industry. And so we're in a lose-lose situation. As a Pennsylvanian, I want to know what's in it for me to have the gas industry here. And what I see is that the gas industry is a net loss for us.
I live in rural northern Lycoming County in Gable Township, which is now home to 161 permitted unconventional gas wells. So I am literally surrounded.
And what's the impact of that been on you and your neighbors?
The impact has been a complete change of sense of place, of peace, of hope for the future. And we have traded that in for the daily stress of wondering if our private well water is safe to drink, wondering about the air. It is no longer possible on many days to sit on my front deck, which overlooks the Loyalsock Creek, and have a conversation because of the truck traffic going by. And so our lives have been forever changed by the presence of this industry, literally in our backyard. My front and close to backyards are the Loyalsock State Forest, which is leased. So the personal violation I feel with regards to the Green Amendment are deep. I no longer feel that I have the right to clean air and pure water. And I have seen the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values literally cut down with chainsaws and destroyed by bulldozers.
Contaminated well water.
There have been people who live near me who have had problems with their well water. I personally have not. I have had my water tested twice to the tune of $1,000 each test. So far, so good. And yet you lie awake at night and wonder if it's time to spend another $1,000 and have the water tested again, especially reading the number of cement casing violations. Because when you watch closely the violations that DEP is issuing to these gas companies, a large preponderance of them has to do with faulty cement casing. Governor Wolf recently said he supported a complete moratorium on fracking in the Delaware watershed. I applaud that decision. I celebrate that decision with the people who live in that watershed. However, that does nothing to help those of us who live here in the Susquehanna watershed, which is home, Lycoming County is currently home to 1,660 permitted gas wells. Because our population is more rural and less dense, we literally are the guinea pigs on top of the Marcellus, the ones who will be paying the price and the ones who have fear about the future and about what it means for our health and well-being.
We are 1 mile north of the Williams-Transco pipeline, and in 2015, in June, that ruptured. An old pipeline that was put in 1963, I think. And it is where, since then, Williams Transco has expanded its pipelines. So we were close to a rupture where people were evacuated. It did not explode. It did not turn into a massive fire, but it was very frightening. And it was an old pipeline. So that was the most dramatic thing that has happened to us, but we've been very concerned about the pipelines. This is the infrastructure for the fracking. The other things about, as I said, the building of actual fracking platforms and wells have not been that close to us, but they are around us. And what ensued after the fracking was the building of the infrastructure, the compressor stations and gathering lines and pipelines. And those things have affected us because we live on a small state highway where all the thousands of trucks that service these operations go by at different times. Sometimes a year they're worse than others. But there's an immense amount of traffic with diesel engines and also bringing very large equipment on very small roads. If we're talking generally about the fracking part, what concerned us immediately was that we suspected this was a bad idea, and people were being paid a very small amount of money for turning their land over to what could be very dangerous and destructive operations. I don't want a well, and I didn't want people on my property. So those are the close-up experiences we've had, and from what we've seen from the fracking around us, I'm very glad we made the decision we did not to lease and not to let the pipelines come through. These are permanent structures and they're dangerous, and our experience with the rupture of the Williams Transco pipeline in 2015 was very frightening. I also have become concerned about the lack of regulations, oversight, and laws that protect landowners and protect people from the hazards of fracking and the gathering. And one thing that made me very concerned was after the 2015 a rupture of the Williams Transco, I talked to PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Agency of the federal government. And at the end of my conversation over a year with talking with them and how they were investigating what they were doing about the safety of the pipelines, led me to think that the industry was overseeing itself, and that the regulation of PHMSA, the pipeline safety folks, was not strong, and that we weren't being protected very much. As far as I know, the impacts have been the same. The impacts for some of them have been financial. Those who decided to lease and did not make very much money on it were disappointed that they didn't get the money they were promised. We have had concerns from neighbors near us who are closer to the compressor stations, which we were unsure what was leaking from the compressor stations, and people with COPD and children with asthma. And they don't get very substantial answers to their questions about how what's out there in the atmosphere that could be endangering them.
So it's been stressful then?
I think the stress of having them, that industry near us, has been extremely stressful. And we have, more and more we've come to be concerned about what are the pollutants that are around us in our air and water, and what the destruction of wildlife in the forest around us have done.
Recently, I've joined a group of hikers, men and women, who hike every Thursday. And for the past roughly 3 years, we've gone almost every Thursday. And we have visited some absolutely spectacular terrain. This area is blessed with magnificent streams great small mountains and wonderful hiking trails, although we sometimes wander off the trails. What's happened of late is that on almost every hike, we come out of the woods off the trail onto a drill pad or a frack pond or a road built by the fracking companies, and it is very, very disturbing, as you might imagine. You're coming out of near pristine, magnificent landscapes, often running along these marvelous small streams, and suddenly you're there in an industrial landscape. The change is dramatic, it's disheartening. This area does well with outdoor recreation. A fair amount of money and tourism flows in here. And I think if this continues much longer, we'll see a diminishing of that great reward for this area.